Once you understand how to use the pushback as the incentive, as the differentiator, then you don't have to compete at all. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Midweek Modern Craftsman, where today I am freezing my butt off. It's like 20-some degrees in New Jersey right now, and I can't take it, and my house is cold. But the good news is we have an exciting midweek this week, as with every week. So on the main podcast this week, we get into talking about asking better questions and what type of questions you should be asking to vet your clients and how that matters so much more than you realize. Today I wanted to speak about that, obviously, with regards to TRG Home Concepts, my business. But I want to talk about what that's looked like over the years, what I got, to be completely honest, wrong early on, and what I've changed, and how those changes have affected the type of projects that I take on and the way that those projects actually run for me. One of the biggest signals that I've learned to pay attention to is what happens when a client pushes back on price or wants just a price early before I've understood if they're a good client. So that pushback isn't a negotiation, it's information. It's an opportunity for me to educate my clients on why I'm different, what we're doing differently. And depending on how that client responds, can really allude to if I want to progress further down that road of entertaining that lead. So this podcast, again, it's going to rely and relate back to the main podcast, but really what I want to do is give you some insight as to how I use vetting to ensure that my client is a good, strong fit early on, and how I'm preserving my time and ensuring that I'm not chasing leads that are not the right leads in the first place. So that's what we're going to dig into today. If you haven't caught the main podcast, check that out. This will tie back into that some, but obviously just with more insight and perspective as to how I operate within my company. So as with most of you, I'm sure this is probably pretty relatable, but most of my lessons in business and in life have come from screwing it up completely and then struggling to make it right, figuring out what I did wrong, and then finally how I would avoid making that same mistake over and over again, because it cost you money the first time, but then you don't want to continue to cost yourself money and time. So early on in my career, leads that came in, saying yes, landing every job, or landing jobs in general, just for the sake of landing them, felt like I was building momentum. It felt like I was getting my name out there, I was creating a reputation for myself, and that my business was growing. But it took me a while to realize that I was either just spinning my wheels or I was actually digging myself into a hole. And some of these projects that I felt were exciting projects, or I was just amped and jazzed to be landing a new job with a new client that I didn't necessarily have ties to, were actually costing me more money than what I was getting paid. So I learned early on that I can't say yes to every job, that certain jobs make me more money than other jobs, but how would I ensure that I had enough of the right jobs and the right clients that I was willing to spend my time on those leads? Some of my most difficult jobs weren't necessarily hard because the job was hard, right? I was doing simpler jobs. I was doing handyman jobs. I was doing jobs that I felt comfortable tackling, but they weren't the most complex jobs. They weren't the most difficult jobs because technically they were hard. It was just that I wasn't aligned with the client. They weren't the type of job or the type of client that I should be working with. So I was kind of doing them just to keep the lights on, and I had to learn from that. So early in my days, anyone would call me, anyone would email me. Like I just got a phone call now from a client, and I would get on the phone with them. I would speak to them. I would give them insight. I would gather all this information from them. I would schedule a time to go meet with them. And it was based on all of their needs, right? what did they need from me? What could I provide? How could I get my foot in the door by conceding time, energy, information, design, feedback? How could I court and land this client by giving away all of this information for free? So I was probably disillusioned, but I think a lot of times I was confused and looking at things with rose-colored glasses, where I felt this interest was commitment from clients, and realistically it wasn't. They had a program, they had needs, they were getting a hold of me because of their needs, and I was not doing a good job of protecting my needs. What were my needs? What did I need to protect there? So I made a lot of the same mistakes over and over again. There were a lot of friction points that I could not work around. There were issues that I ran into that I didn't have systems, and I didn't really understand what I needed to do to correct them. And in hindsight, a lot of this was the same type of clients, it was the same type of jobs, and it was the same type of work that I was putting out. So I wasn't doing anything to make a change. It was just, you've heard me say it a million times, it was more of the same and more of the same. And I realized that that's what I had to change. So again, early days, I'd get a phone call, I'd give them so much time and so much energy and try and sell them on why I was the right fit for them, rather than taking a step back, gauging who the client was, asking the right questions, ensuring that our programs aligned, ensuring that our budgets aligned, ensuring that my needs were being met, or ensuring that there was potential for my needs to be met on this job, rather than me just being able to serve this client. I was so concerned with my ability to be able to serve this client and serve this client well and give them everything to make them happy, that I was not protecting my margins. I wasn't protecting my mental health. I wasn't protecting my sanity. I wasn't protecting my family's time. I wasn't protecting my employees. I was just making sure that all of my clients' needs were being met. And I will tell you, yeah, you can grow a business that way. I got better customers. I grew my business. I created a reputation. I have clients for life. I probably spent 10 years digging myself a hole that was really difficult to get out of, because I had these return clients that were expecting me to treat them the same way that I always had, and bend over backwards and work for nothing and meet their price point and over deliver and over execute on everything, and not necessarily be compensated for what I needed to do. They knew that they could call me at any time. I would drop what I was doing, and I got to a point in my life where I had to change that. I couldn't do that forever, and these return clients that were expecting that service all of a sudden were in for a rude awakening when I was like, no, I'm not going to come over on a Sunday. No, I'm not going to be the least expensive while also giving you everything. And obviously, that's a slippery slope, and you have to address that properly. But I had to make a change. I had to realize that I cannot give everything away for free. I cannot continue to work for nothing. And I have to make a major change within my business. What motivated me to do that? One, having kids, understanding what my future looked like, what we needed to support our lifestyle, understanding that I didn't necessarily want a huge company, right? I didn't want a dozen employees that I could make margins on. So I had to make sure that all of my time was able to be captured, that I had a small amount of hours that I could bill for. So I wanted to make sure that I was getting compensated accordingly, that I couldn't be making mistakes over and over again, that I had to get paid for my time outside of swinging a hammer. So I began to realize that I had to restructure the numbers of my company. I had to restructure the people within my company, but I also had to restructure my client base. I had to restructure my vetting process and my lead intake and what questions I was asking. I realized that I have a very specific client, and I have certain jobs that make me money. And if I understand all of the parameters, and I'm not going to get into all of those parameters, but if I understand the parameters of what makes a good client for me, and what makes a good job for me and what makes me money. Can I then use all of that information to screen and vet my clients to make sure that I'm spending the right amount of time with the right clients, instead of just having a client call me, listening to their needs, and then trying to figure out how I can morph and adapt myself and my system and my employees and my subcontractors to meet their needs, whether it's timeline, budget, geographic location, type of job. That's what I always did. And it was to serve people. It was to make everyone's experience amazing, but it all came at a cost to me. So when I started realizing, there's certain jobs that make me money, there's a certain structure of my business that makes me money, and there's certain clients that are willing to pay me the money that I need to make as a small business owner, I started understanding what that client looked like. Once I understood what that client looked like, I had to understand what my marketing would be to entice that client or to educate that client on who I was. So for years, I tried to sell jobs on that I would be a price point equivalent of my competition or slightly above, but I would over deliver. So maybe I was 10% more, but I would give you 25% more. I would give you 30% more. So that was my selling tactic, right? That, hey, maybe I'm slightly more, but I'm going to execute so much more. And what ends up happening is I just spent more time and I just spent more money on jobs and I made less money. So I had to understand that that was not sustainable, that my business model was fundamentally flawed, and that I needed to make major changes. When I started making those changes, I started to get pushback. I started to get pushback on my price, on my processes, on my pre-construction, on wanting to go time and material. Clients started to push back. So I realized I could look at this two ways. I could look at this, hey, what I'm doing is never going to work. Nobody else is doing it this way, at least in my market with the type of jobs that I do and being smaller scale, that I can't charge for pre-construction. I can't charge the rate that I want to make the money that I need to. I can't capture my time off hours, and I can't afford to have a lifestyle that I feel is good for myself because other people just aren't doing that. So I started getting all of this pushback. And I realized, again, I could look at this two ways. One, that my systems are never going to work and that I should just go back to doing what I was doing, or I should just look to compete. Or I could use all of this pushback as incentive and motivation and my differentiating factor that, hey, yeah, most people don't do this. Yeah, this is an additional cost. No, I'm not going to credit you this money back. There are all of these things that people were coming to me and they were pushing back against. Yeah, my price is 30% higher. All of these things that earlier in my career, I would say, you know what? I'm going to lower my price because my phone's not ringing. I'm not going to try and do pre-construction because people aren't willing to pay for it. I'm not going to capture my my back end or my office hours because other people aren't doing that and I need to remain competitive. I always said I didn't want to compete. So if all of these reasons that people are pushing back against are because I'm doing things differently, then that's exactly what I wanted. I just had to figure out how to get to the right client, how to vet the right client, what questions to ask to make sure that these clients were okay with what most of my clients were rejecting. I don't need 100 clients a year. Maybe I need 5. What if I spent more time focusing on how to get 5 clients who don't think of my pricing as an excuse to push back, or they don't think of my pre-construction as just a supplemental cost that's unnecessary? What if they realize that, yeah, his numbers are tight, he runs his books correctly. I want somebody who's on top of the budget, who manages the budget. I like that you're time and material because I get to choose how I spend my money, and you're just not going to work for free and exhaust hours on a budget that you're not going to be able to capture. So you're going to have good communication. What if I focused on finding those type of clients rather than the clients who wanted me to competitively bid jobs, rather than the clients who wanted to say, hey, nobody else is charging for pre-con? What if I focused on that 5% of the 100 leads that came in rather than the 95% or the 100% and trying to sell everything or just adapt and shapeshift to meet my clients' needs? So I realized I had to slow down. I had to start saying no to people. I had to really understand what the pushback was about and then how I would use what people were pushing back against as my differentiator. Because once you understand how to use the pushback as the incentive, as the differentiator, then you don't have to compete at all. Because your client is somebody who's looking for that, not somebody who wants to push back against that. Once you find somebody that struggled with maintaining budget and you explain to them that, yes, everything's time and material, here are my loaded labor rates, here are our markups, here's the scope of work, here's the budget, you pick and choose how you want me to spend my time, which is essentially spend your money. Once I find somebody who's excited about that, I don't have to compete with everyone else because they don't want to pick somebody who's lump sum. They want somebody who's on top of the budget, who controls, who communicates, who ensures that whatever their program is, whatever their needs are, you're meeting it with regard to speed, with regard to execution, with regard to budget, communication, whatever it is. So I learned how to use the pushback as motivation and differentiation within my company. There's certain questions that I ask. There's certain telltale signs when clients get a hold of me that I ensure I'm using to vet my clients. Early on, it was analytical information. It was, where do they live? How much is their house worth? And this is all good information. I still do use it, but it's not what I hang my hat on when I'm picking a client. A lot of that was based on ego. It was based on doing the highest level of work that I could do within my market. Did they have a designer? Were they willing to work with a designer? Have they started using an architect? How much their house is worth, what their total budget is for the job. All of this information, really important, and it will dictate your jobs. But for me, there is less analytical transactional information that will dictate if that client's a fit for me. If I have a client who trusts my systems, who understands what I do and wants to fit into my systems and figure out how they can work with me, maybe they don't want to do a $200,000 kitchen. Maybe they want to do a $75,000 kitchen, a $100,000 kitchen. And I can make the money that I need to on that job, and that client respects my time. They're willing to pay for pre-construction. They're willing to pay me an hourly rate. Maybe it's not the sexiest job in the world, but I get guaranteed paid for every one of my hours. Maybe that client's a better fit than the client who comes to me who wants the $200,000, $250,000 kitchen, but then they don't want to pay my markup. They want a fixed cost lump sum bid. They're not comfortable with time and material. They want to purchase certain materials on their own, or they want to use certain vendors that they've used before. This client is taking me outside of my systems, and now I'm fitting into their program. The budget checked off for this client, right? They had the money to spend on the kitchen. They lived in the neighborhood that I typically work. All of the transactional information was right. They fit the mold, but they weren't my client because they didn't want to play by my rules. Now I have this client who, their house isn't as nice. It's not typically where I work. It's not the type of work that I built my business on, but they're willing to play by my rules. They're willing to follow my lead. They trust me. They trust the vision. And they're completely comfortable with me taking the reins on this project. So that guarantees me that I'm going to make the money that I need to, that I'm going to sign the contract that works best for me, and that regardless of if the budget is a third of the overall budget of what the other person wanted to spend, I'm still making what I need to on a daily basis. I need to make sure that, yeah, budget's important for me. Yeah, the neighborhood's typically important. Yeah, there's a certain income demographic and there's typically a certain house value that dictates the type of work that I'm doing, but I can't only focus on those leads because I'm forcing fit, which may not be ideal for me in my business. So when I got rid of my ego to a certain extent, and I realized not everything has to be perfect, and that perfection and execution and quality are all very relative terms, I stopped chasing numbers. I stopped chasing clout. I stopped chasing types of jobs, designers, architects, neighborhood-driven work, and I started focusing on clients that respect me, clients that honor my systems, and what works for Tyler and what works for TRG Home Concepts, and I based a lot of my vetting on that. A suggestion when you're creating these vetting tools that we discussed on the main podcast, and how you're ensuring alignment with your client and how you're ensuring that your client's willing to sign up for pre-construction, how you're educating your client on all of these things. Yeah, the demographics and the psychographics of clients is very, very important. And you should base your marketing to a certain extent on it. You should build your funnel around that to a certain extent. But while vetting these clients, there's a lot of attributes that you have to consider that are more qualitative than quantitative. Understand your systems, understand your business, understand what are the non-negotiables, and vet your clients based on that. One of the biggest and most, I would say, accurate vetting tool for me is asking my clients how they heard about me or why they're getting in touch with me. And to me, that was one of those questions early on that people would say or I would hear, and it wouldn't really tell me much because I knew why they were getting a hold of me. They needed another number. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I did well. I knew what I wanted to do, but if somebody told me why they were hiring me, I wouldn't really know what to do with that. That information wasn't critical to me because I didn't understand me. So now the answer to that question is so telling for me. When somebody gets a hold of me and they say, oh, I found you on a Facebook group, or my neighbor follows you on social media, or I found you when I Googled contractors in Medford, that is not a high quality lead for me. Maybe something were to come from it, but I understand that my ideal client is somebody who comes with me, who comes to me and wants to trust me. So the client who has no idea who I am, but they're getting a handful of numbers and they get a hold of me because their neighbor's cousin told me, check this guy out, he's in your area, I follow him on Instagram. They know nothing about me. They haven't followed my story for a couple of years. They don't have a mutual connection with me that really understands who I am and what's important to me. So that lead, although it may fit the psychographics and the demographics, it may look like it's the right fit for me, might not be as good as a fit for somebody who lives in a working class neighborhood, who's followed my story and really values certain aspects of what I do and wants a contractor that they can trust that's going to take care of their family, be a steward for their project, keep their house clean, and maintain a budget. Like that client to me, although the number may not be as big on the job, is going to be more rewarding, more enjoyable. I'll get better leads from it, and also I'm guaranteed to make the money that I need to because I'm not going to be strong-armed into executing their program or fulfilling their needs. So the answer to that question, when somebody has no idea who I am, is very telling to me. More telling than somebody telling me that they have the right number for my baseline kitchen remodel. Again, that's important. I have to know where I make my money and at what point I just don't make money anymore. But the client who comes to me and says, hey, I'm looking to get a price, that's a huge red flag for me right off the bat. Hey, we're looking to get an estimate. If that's how you lead or segue into conversation with me, I'm probably not going to put much weight into that conversation. So I think of it, right, if I'm going to enlist the services of somebody, if I was going to hire somebody to do something in my house, if I was going to go get tattooed, if I wanted to get my friggin' haircut by somebody, am I concerned with how much I'm going to pay? Yes. It's always a concern. Is that the main driver? When I go to get tattooed, is my main driver how much it's going to cost? No. It's going to be there forever. I do want to understand what that price point looks like, where they live in the spectrum of things, but I've educated myself on what those costs look like based on where you are, what type of work it is, if they're in a private studio, if they work for a shop, if somebody's taking I understand all of those things. I've educated myself. I know what the range should be, and I know when somebody's going to be more expensive or when somebody's going to be less expensive, but I wouldn't base my decision on getting tattooed because somebody was less expensive than somebody else. That's a terrible idea. I don't value what they do enough with their tattoo to be like, I want a tattoo from you regardless, even if it's 30% more, because I love your tattoos. I'm making a decision. Yeah, I'm considering price, but that's not the driver for that decision because I'm going to wind up probably with a bunch of shitty tattoos. So I want my clients, and I want to approach people in the service industry the same way. Hey, like if I was reaching out to get tattooed by somebody, to get my haircut somebody, hey, I followed your work for a really long time. Love what you do. It's beautiful. I want to learn a little bit more. If you're taking new clients, what your system looks like, what I could do to get on your list. Could we hop on a phone call just to get a better sense of how you work? For me, that's how I would approach somebody in a service industry. I would not reach out to somebody who was cutting my hair, or I would not reach out to a tattoo artist and say, hey, what's your hourly cost? That's just not, hey, I want a sleeve. Can you tell me how much this is going to cost? There's ways that you can educate yourself to understand that, or that conversation could be had later. But if that's what you're leading your conversation with, one, that tattooer is probably just going to be like, go pound sand. Two, you're making them feel as the only aspect of you going to them for a tattoo is how much it costs, rather than, I absolutely love the style of tattooing that you do. It's very unique. I love the way that you incorporate your backgrounds into your subject, and that like you take a very traditional sense to Japanese tattooing, but you're not necessarily tattooing in a very traditional manner. Like now I'm going to this person and they understand I like what they do. I really appreciate the art. I appreciate their style. I'm really interested in getting tattooed by them. Then we can walk down that road. I can tell them we can walk down that path. I can tell them what I'm thinking of getting. I can understand, hey, how long do you think this is going to take? How many sessions? How long do you do a session at a time? Are you doing 3-hour sessions? Are you only doing 2-hour sessions? Will you tattoo me straight through? I can then gauge what this process looks like to continue to guarantee that this tattooer is a good fit for me and I'm a good fit for them. One of the last things I'll do, if I ever ask, is, hey, how much is this going to cost? Because there's so many other things to consider there. Yeah, I won't pay somebody $1,000 an hour to tattoo me, but I understand where the rate should be, and I'm going to make my decision based on many more important attributes and parameters than what they're going to charge me per hour to get tattooed. And I want my clients coming to me for that with that same mindset. So I base my vetting questions the same way that I would want to approach somebody within the service industry. So the questions that I ask and the responses and how I'm educating potential leads is super important to tell me who's a good fit for me, who's going to appreciate what I'm doing, who really likes my systems, who's educated themselves on who I am rather than just found me online. I know that we talk about demographics a lot. I know that we talk about psychographics. I know that we talk about numbers. We were talking about ballparking. We were talking about budget. It's such an important part of every conversation that everyone has a budget. But if you can find ways to vet your clients, if you can find ways to tell your story, if you can find ways to create, run, and establish a business where there's so much more to it than just the budget, you will have a far more successful and lucrative career, because budget's always going to matter for everyone. Everyone's always going to talk about budget. So like, why? Why is that what you're focusing on your angle? Why are you allowing that be the determining factor? Like that's a part of it, but sell something that's so much more unique, that's so unique to you that the price is secondary. The budget is secondary. It's a part of it, yes. But if you can sell something that's unique to you, if you can differentiate yourself, if you can have that strong value proposition where you're the only person who offers what you do, all of the rest of that's going to be secondary. So use that to vet your clients. Use that to create your vetting process. Use that to analyze leads, to create an intake form. It's not always just about what size project. Where do you live? What type of houses do you have? Do you have a designer? To me, there's more important questions than that. So vetting shouldn't just be, it is filtering people out, but that's not the only thing that we're trying to do. We're trying to protect ourselves. We're trying to protect our employees. We're trying to protect the leads that are coming to us to make sure that they're not wasting our time and we're not wasting their time. And if you're just starting your company and you're feeling that you're getting a lot of pushback, you need to look into why you're getting the pushback, but then also really understand that pushback can be an absolute blessing to you. Because if you can find ways to market your business and you can find ways to create that value proposition where that pushback is actually why people hire you, right? Why that pushback is the basis for your differentiation, you're going to be in a far better spot. You're not going to be competing with every single person in your network and your geographic area. You're going to create value, or you're going to create differentiation for yourself that's going to be the keystone of your business. So take that into account when you're early on in this process and you have clients getting a hold of you and you're entertaining leads and you're in that like courting stage. Understand why you're asking the questions you are, and understand who your client is and how you need to properly vet them, because it might not always just be, hey, what's your ballpark? What's your price? How do you structure your business? Are you cost plus? Are you time material? Are you fixed cost? Are you lump sum? There's a lot more to it than just the financial considerations. Again, if you have not checked out the main podcast, hop on, give that a listen. I'm trying to tie these back to the main podcast. Some depends on which one I'm doing first. So the main podcast may reflect this one more. This one may reflect the main podcast more, but give it a listen. The idea is to have a similar topic where I'm gauging Nick's perspective, where we're looking at a much bigger picture, where we're considering a wider spread vantage point than just my small business. So I know a lot of you guys and girls are coming here because I operate a similar business to you, that I have a similar mindset to you, that there's things that are more important to me than just growing a massive business. There's things that are more important to me than just my business. But I want to make sure you guys and girls are making money, that you're not going to bat just for yourselves, right? I want to be a resource for you to help better yourself, to better your business, to understand that you're not alone in what you're doing and that you can do this. If I'm doing this and I'm as small as I am, you can most certainly do this. But also the perspective of Nick and myself on the podcast, much bigger picture, different type of company, a bit of pushback between the two of us. Obviously, we're unique to ourselves in our own market. So give a listen to that if you want some perspective. If you're thinking of going in a direction, I think it's going to be really interesting. And then what we're going to be doing based on a lot of these conversations is have a live podcast where you guys and girls can come on, ask us questions. We can discuss a lot of this stuff and just get it, I guess, have a more interactive experience. So keep an eye out for when we're going to schedule that. I've always done all of my consulting, basically reaching out to me via email. We'll set something up. If you're interested in consulting, you can shoot me an email, tyler@trghomeconcepts.com. Our good friend Katie Kath out in Minnesota recently invited me to be part of her Build Bar program, where I can run all of my consulting directly through that. So I'll probably give you a link to that. It's a little bit easier for me. You can sign up right there. You can access my calendar right there. If you're concerned with the date or a time, or you need something more selective, you can shoot me an email, tyler@trghomeconcepts.com. We can sort out what works. Then you can go on there and book that. It's just going to simplify what I have going on with consulting. Obviously, life's crazy, business is crazy, podcast is crazy. If I can simplify it, that's what I'm trying to do with the Build Bar initiative there. So if you're interested, check out Build-Bar online. And then if that doesn't work out for you, again, you can shoot me an email, tyler@trghomeconcepts.com or hello@moderncraftsman.co. Also, sign up for the newsletter. I don't know what you all are waiting on. Nick and I have huge plans for this. We give out a ton of information there. What he's recently doing is taking our show notes that we have, preparing ourselves for these conversations, all the information that we may or may not get to during the actual podcast itself, and we're providing you with those show notes that we create for the show so that you'll have more information either leading into the podcast or afterwards that we may or may not cover. So sign up for the newsletter. You can get that at moderncraftsman.co. And as always, I appreciate all of you. Thanks for the support. Thanks for the repost. Thanks for the listen. And I will catch you all next week.